Welcome, everyone. Hello, this is Amy Brown, Director of Events and Education for Trade Press Media. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast. Incident Management, Concepts and Tools to Help Ensure Effective Emergency Communications. Today's presenter is Timm Weber. Timm has been in the fire and life safety industry for over 30 years, starting in the field as a technician after graduating with a degree in engineering technology from ITT Technical Institute. Mr. Weber is a member of NFPA and is certified by the National Institute for Certification in Engineering Technologies in Fire Protection Engineering Technology and Fire Alarm Systems. Mr. Weber's focus is to educate building owners and facility managers on the latest life safety technologies and code requirements to help ensure effective response and management of different emergency events. Today's learning objectives include understand the core competence of incident management, review how different incidents impact different types of applications and buildings, and examine how life safety-based solutions offer flexibility and survivability. Before we get started with today's webcast, I'd like to go over a few other details. A live question and answer session will follow today's presentation. To submit a question, please navigate to the bottom of the screen and look for the Q&A button, where you'll be able to type in your question. Our presenter will answer as many questions as time permits. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive an email with a copy of today's slides via PDF, and you'll also receive a link to a brief online assessment. Upon successful completion of that assessment, you'll receive your CEU transcript. Today's webcast will also be archived at FacilitiesNet.com/webcasts. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Timm.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you, everyone, for attending this webcast. As Amy stated, I am the Strategic Accounts Director for Edwards. We're a fire alarm and life safety systems manufacturer, part of the Carrier Corporation. So to kind of get started, here we go. Oh, back up. Sorry about that. Taking control here is just a little bit. So to start, here's a brief agenda of what we're going to be discussing today. Obviously, I'll give you a little introduction on Edwards and our new parent company, Carrier. We'll get into incident management and define what that is and some of the concepts around it, as well as some tools that could be utilized. Some brief applications, and then the importance of communication and things of that nature. And then, as Amy mentioned, we'll get into the questions that actually came up. So Carrier is sorry about that again. So Carrier, guess I'm clicking a little bit too quick. Let's slow down here. So Carrier is our new parent company. For those of you that may know, back on the 4th of April of this month, United Technologies Corporation actually completed their divestiture of their different entities. Carrier, HVAC, along with Edwards and several other building solutions companies were broken away and created a new publicly traded entity now called Carrier. Also, another company that was broken out was the Otis Elevator and Escalator, which is publicly traded under the name Otis. And then United Technologies formulated a new aerospace division that's called Raytheon Technologies and traded under that umbrella. Now, the Carrier company actually comprises of, like I said, the fire and security, HVAC, and refrigeration. As you can see, the HVAC piece makes up of multiple brands in that space, and the HVAC piece makes up 50%, where the fire and security and refrigeration make up the other 50% of the business. We are primarily a group of companies that manufacture, but there are some direct field services globally across the countries, about 180, and roughly an estimated 54,000 different employees around the country as well. To take one step further, to look at what are some of the iconic brands or companies that make up Carrier, there's obviously the Carrier HVAC, which has both the commercial and residential brands for Carrier. Automated logic controls that you see there after the Carrier symbol is our building automation solution that supports the Carrier brands as well as other HVAC brands. Chubb happens to be a direct-to-market fire and security business based in the European area as well as Canada. Obviously, Edwards in the fire and security space, and then Kidde. Kidde is actually, you probably recognize that symbol from our smoke alarm and fire extinguisher space, but Kidde is also a company that actually is in the commercial and industrial fire suppression space for critical assets such as like data centers. Then there's Linnell S2, which is in the access control, intrusion, and video space. And then finally, wrapping up there on the far right is Onity. Onity happens to be a provider of electronic locking systems a lot in the hospitality, education, and healthcare space, as well as some other businesses. So let's move on to the topic that we're here for, incident management systems. So an incident management system, and this is a definition from the National Fire Protection Association, or as a lot of people recognize the acronym NFPA. Their standard 1600, which was developed and brought forth probably about 6 or 7 years ago, on continuity, emergency, and crisis management. As you can see from the definition, a system actually comprises of not only equipment, but also personnel, procedures, the communication around how you're going to be communicating to the organization, the design and the management of the overall solution that needs to be accomplished for your incident management application. If we take one more step further into this, and you look at NFPA 1600, as well as another NFPA standard 1620, which is the standard for pre-incident planning, there's 3 items that actually make up the pillars of an incident management solution or system. Mitigation, which is first and foremost that activities around to reduce what the impacts of an emergency or hazards occur. This is also the spot where what actually is identified in NFPA as well as the International Building Code as risk management assessment occurs. Taking the time to look at your facility and understand what are the hazards and how to prepare an emergency response plan. The emergency response plan is that procedure or that manual for preparedness. And in preparedness, we get into where we have systems, we implement and develop and program capabilities. Then obviously you've got a solution, you've got a system, then it's response. So when a hazard actually occurs, what is the immediate ongoing activities that take place? What are the automated processes? What are the procedures that are going to protect the property and operations? And then we get into recovery, the activities and programs that get back into business continuity. So we'll take a little bit further, deeper depth into these 4 pillars. So mitigation. I already mentioned risk assessment and identifying those threats. It's also continual improvement of your incident management system. When you're going to complete a test or there happens to be an event, going back and taking the time to look at that emergency response plan, re-look at the assessment, and making sure it's a constantly breathing, living document and moving forward. Preparedness. The biggest thing in preparedness, which I think needs to come out of that, is one of training. We are very accustomed to train and do drills around fire alarm systems, but do we actually take the time to actually implement and do drills for other hazards or emergency events, weather events that are part of our system, active shooter events, chemical spills, those types of things. And also understanding how a mass notification communication system that is actually broadcasting around our facility to actually get those messages out. Are the people understanding it? Response. Response gets into having an incident command system that can be a single operator solution that helps receive an operator that receives automatic events, or actually they may actually manually activate something of an event that actually comes in that they're aware of, and getting that mass notification communication outward, as well as causing those interactions with other solutions that actually need to do something because of the event type. And then finally, again, recovery, right? That's that business impact analysis and the business continuity. Taking the time to analyze what actually occurred, with the system, how quickly we can get back to business and get things moving forward. We always got to, again, it's a revolving circle. So to move off of this platform, but taking it to the next step and looking at an occupancy type. So first, obviously, incident management, we see that a lot in the global dispersed organizations. Large companies, they have the environmental health and safety people. But also to take the time that understand today with NFPA, as well as the International Building Code, they have now put into the NFPA 101, which is the life safety standard, or is the standard that is what we would call the WARE. This is an occupancy type that identifies that you would need a mass notification system. That mass notification system is part of your emergency response plan. High rises today, if you didn't know, a building that has over 5,000 people per floor, that's a high rise, or the building actually is 420 feet or higher, needs to have a risk analysis completed for mass notification. Assembly spaces, an assembly space with an occupant load of 500 or more people is another type of occupancy that is required to have that risk analysis. Obviously, education or campus environments for education in the K through 12 or in higher education, that's kind of a given, just due to the unfortunate situations that have occurred from active shooter events over time. Hotels and dormitories obviously being part of that higher education space. We are also seeing in our company, we are seeing airports and transportation, data centers, IT companies, and a lot of activity in the industrial and distribution center spaces. Being able to have a clear and concise voice message that actually gets into these larger open spaces where you have staff and people to alert them of a particular hazard or event occurs. Now again, in these codes and standards, mass notification is a significant component, obviously, of the emergency response plan. And Chapter 9 of NFP 101 is where you'll see begins the fire alarm system requirements, and you'll see that the mass notification pieces come into play. Now, stepping into what is actually going to construct an actual technology, software, hardware solution component of an incident management plan. The first thing we really need to take in mind is making sure that we make this strategy easy. We make it easy to implement for the most part, execute, manage, and most of all, operate, so that the operators, it's simple to operate. Identifying and collaborating with stakeholders. Those stakeholders would be internal, right? Your operations people, your IT people, security, environmental health and safety, your facility engineering people. Then you have your external stakeholders. They need to be part of this constructing of this solution. You have your authority having jurisdiction, your fire marshals, law enforcement, maybe your local emergency management is part of it. There's also a major component that actually is we also need to talk about when we start looking at these different types of systems and having them come together. For instance, a fire alarm system, a security, building automation, elevators, and paging. And when you start connecting them together is cybersecurity and understanding what the cyber threats could be when you start connecting and integrating the different solutions. For an incident management software solution to work effectively, each management characteristic should contribute at least the strength and efficiency of the role of the system, right? So incident communications are facilitated through the development and use of common communications plan and interoperable communication process and architectures. Preparedness and emergency response planning should always address the equipment, the systems, the protocols that are necessary to achieve that voice and data piece of your system when you're starting to put it together. I've already mentioned the NFPA requirements around NFPA. There's also the International Building Code. So there's a couple of additional documents that are out there that can be, and all of this can be utilized as tools. So I mentioned the 1600 and the 1620. There's also 1616. That is the mass evacuation and sheltering and reentry programs. FEMA has a document available. the National Incident Management System. Those all are tools that for when you're looking at building an incident management system, and again, that's not just technology, but it's also policies and processes and developing people. They have tools here that you can actually utilize to start building it and looking at how to create a risk analysis. Now, NFPA 72 is the how code. So I mentioned earlier NFPA 101 or IBC, that is the where code. Where should I actually, what occupancy type should I be deploying a mass notification system that'll be part of my emergency response plan? NFPA 72 is the standard that says this is how that should be implemented. And in NFPA 72, they also have a guide around executing and developing your risk analysis. So you can use that as a part of the tool mechanism. Some other standards that have been around for a number of years that you may not be aware of are in the government sector. The Department of Defense has had an anti-terrorism standard and a mass notification system standard that's part of the different Department of Defense facilities for different military installations. They've had that around for a number of years. So really, again, the takeaway here is not to try and reinvent the wheel when you're putting together an incident management strategy. There are tools such as these standards out there and organizations that can help develop that risk analysis, which moves into an emergency response plan to get your emergency management system objectives achieved. It's also a way for if there is a situation that occurs that a facility owner has a defendable position that shows them how they came up with their incident management strategy, how it was developed, how it was deployed, the drilling and the testing procedures that were handled. Stepping forward off of this code and standards piece takes us into what we would classify as kind of like a building platform. So as you can see from the NFPA standards, first of all, a fire alarm system. Fire alarm systems are required in buildings. That's been there for years according to the NFPA requirements and building codes. That becomes that foundation of where you should consider looking at building your incident management technology strategy, because that fire alarm system is supervised. It provides communication throughout your facility. When a fire alarm system activates, you have to have communication not just in the public spaces, but you also have to have that communication back of house. You have to have it in your other areas of your facility. So this is the obvious reason that a fire alarm system looks at being that basis or the foundation of getting forward. Because as you probably know, a fire alarm system has to be UL listed to 864. It's part of the codes, like I mentioned. It's part of specifications. It has to be inspected, semi-annually or annually. It's designed. It has a true design of what has to be deployed. You have lights that have to flash and cover areas out throughout the space where the viewing area. You have sound. Sound has to be heard in decibel levels. So it's easy to see that the fire alarm system actually becomes your foundation moving upward to get your technology portion of your incident management plan. And in-building communication. Deployment of notification devices in building around the wide area for your non-public spaces, especially roof and penthouses, when you have a maintenance or you have a contractor on site that may be working in one of these other back of house areas. How are they going to get that message? The visual component. Now, visual is not actually a requirement today in any of the building codes or standards. It is a requirement actually in that Department of Defense standard that I mentioned earlier. They actually have utilized or deployed yellow, or amber I should say, in several of the different military type installations. We have also seen companies that have deployed blue or red lights to form a visual component. On top of that visual and communication piece, the other things that fire alarm systems have to have are intelligible voice communication. So it's required that a voice alarm fire alarm system has an intelligible transmission of voice. There's two different methods of testing and measuring that now in the field when it is required by the AHJ to be tested. low frequency. That's applied in your sleeping environments. It's a study and found out that certain frequencies will wake a hearing impaired person, children, or elderly. That's another component of being deployed from a sound perspective. So consider the deployment of your voice evacuation system. You know, if your facility today or a facility that you're looking to build doesn't have a requirement for voice because of the height of the building or the occupancy load of the building or the building that's being built, you have a return on the investment to actually invest now into a voice evac fire alarm system, because now you can use those voice messages, you know, and have those voice messages out through your speakers to give communication to occupants about other particular hazards. So you have something that actually can continue to give you an investment back as you look at either deploying an incident management solution immediately or down the road, or when you're looking to upgrade a system. There's also the requirements around UL. If you didn't know that UL actually has put together, when a mass notification system is part of an incident management plan, it should be UL listed. 2572 happens to be that standard. Also in that piece, when we start talking about mass notification, it's not just obviously the in-building communication component, it's also that direct recipient communication, which a lot of us are familiar with, especially those who have school-age children, right? You get text messages, you get emails. Having those types of systems integrate together so you have one activation that actually gets those messages out throughout the building as well as out through the direct recipient solutions. And I can't stress enough here about the intelligibility and making sure that that voice piece actually gets out. Then working our way up the pyramid, we get into that piece that we talked about earlier in the construction of a system. That's starting to leverage all the different existing solutions. Obviously, the obvious ones are building automation for your HVAC control and security, but there's a new component, especially when we're talking about those high-rise buildings that have to have a risk analysis done. You know, a high-rise building that is at that 420 feet or greater, which is a super high-rise type facility, now has an option for what's called operator evacuation for an elevator. So the fire alarm and life safety system have to integrate with an operation elevator occupant elevator evacuation solution so that if people can evacuate of a building. So this would also become part of your incident management strategy. And then again, back into that software-based notification, getting those other pieces out and bringing them together. Another point is having things interface together from a technology piece or an API, an application program interface. That's another item to be considering. Is that the right thing to do? Have it an interface or have it integrated? You know, what is it? Because again, you have to remember about the cybersecurity threats. How is that going to play into things? For us at Edwards, our workstation, our incident management workstation platform, we utilize our workstation, we call it Fireworks. But same thing would comprise of other solutions, but that Fireworks solution becomes that tip point at the top of the pyramid. It's going to possibly receive automatic input information. That input may be a gunshot detection system. It may be interfacing with your the National Weather Service. You know, it would also push out, you know, maybe it's information that activates a signage system or paging or other types of control and command. So that becomes that central hub of bringing things together. And again, Fireworks, you know, provides a cybersecurity protection, and as well as being UL listed for the 2572 applications. This next slide here is actually just a high-level slide of what a Fireworks solution may be, how it may be connecting, and be connecting to a customer's LAN or WAN, a cloud service, connecting through an IT switch, that IT switch being a listed switch for this application as well, connecting to, you know, maybe it's connecting to an IP type input-output relay device for monitoring or activating something else, connecting to third-party fire systems as well as security systems. So let's kind of move into the next phase of the conversation, which is our application phase. So in looking at that application piece, first we need to kind of step back again, go back into those tools, those documents, and look at the National Incident Management System from FEMA, as well as NFPA 1600. They clearly identify different types of hazard types. And we have to remember that these hazard types not only have to be hazard types that are resident within our own facilities, but what's resident in your neighbor's facility or down the street. Is there a train that goes by your facility or near your facility? Is the facility next door or down the street, do they actually use some manufacturing that uses some type of chemical process that they've got tanks outside, something of that nature? These are all types of things that we need to consider and looking at understanding those hazards when we start looking at applications. So biological, an intentional piece. If you had something that intentionally happened, do you have in your procedures of your emergency response plan a way to have your emergency strategy manually activated so that it can actually initiate immediately because it was an intentional cause, right? Geological. This happens to be, this next slide is an example of what would a possible active shooter automatic type interaction be. In this application, we were using one of those IP type net relays communicating across the client's internet or IP address, LAN or WAN, and then reporting directly into your incident management workstation. And then that automatically takes that input and it immediately starts in an active shooter situation, right? We're going to immediately start interfacing and pushing information out to our direct recipient tools, so that message can get onto people's cell phones and computer pop-ups, though also at the same time interfacing with that commercial fire alarm system so that the voice message is getting out. So that voice message is also clearly and distinctly heard and understood within the space. It may need to be pushed outside, so you have high-powered speaker arrays outside of the facility. Activating locks. Do we need to lock the facility down? Do we need to unlock the facility? And having those automatic triggers occur in this type of application. Then here's another sample of what might occur. Could be a chemical spill. I kind of mentioned that already. And in that application there, you have fans. You have HVAC. Maybe you need to turn those fans off because it's actually something that occurred outside. Instead of bringing fresh air into your facility that's toxic, you need to activate and turn those fans off because of a chemical spill outside. Or it's in your facility and you have a chemical detection system that's being monitored. And that occurs, and then we want to do something in advising our people inside the facility and around the facility. Again, communicating outward with our direct recipient type mass notification solutions, getting that wide area messages out through the fire alarm voice evac system, and that message is because it's going to be able to cover the facility. And again, that locking or unlocking doors. Third here application for you to consider is the weather, right? A weather threat, is very important. Sometimes they come out of nowhere, especially this time of year. We see a lot of different extreme weather events through the Tornado Alley area, right? Monitoring the National Weather Service. Maybe you set your solution up to where you have, a tiered scenario. The first tier actually being when you have a tornado, watch, right? A tornado watch means that there's a possibility of a tornado that may occur, in the local area within a given window of time. That tornado watch turns into a tornado warning. That could be your second level of activation. Now, in that first piece, maybe you only sent messages out through the direct recipient information, right, to those cell phones for text message and email and pop-ups. But this second level, we get into a tornado warning. Now we really want to start advising occupants that are working on the factory floors, that are within the building. We want them to move and get to that shelter location away from the windows and making sure that they're safe in case we get to the third level, which would be the actual tornadoes on the ground. It's been spotted, and we activate that third level, and we tell the people that it's too late to get into that sheltering place. They just need to immediately get to the nearest inside wall or something of that nature. Things of that level and thinking of the hazards around weather, need to be considered when you're actually in this process. Then there's also the fire and life safety piece, because we've been, talking about how, the interfacing to get that message out utilizing a voice evac fire alarm system. So that incident management operator console needs to have that capability of interfacing directly with a third party or a multitude of different fire alarm life safety systems that may be within a campus area, as well as a different product that's in your facility. And how do we get those messages in there? Having that fire alarm system, again, being UL listed, it's got to be able to receive some input on voice, and maybe that would be a voice over IP type interface to get that message into that fire alarm system so it activates to tell people what they need to be doing during a particular emergency hazard. I kind of touched on this on the technology side, but this also brings in, when we start talking about an incident management operator console and interfacing with the fire and life safety systems, you have to definitely get with that IT person, the AHJ, because in making sure that those stakeholders are bought in to what this interfacing is going to do and what that emergency response plan consists of, and making sure that it's a listed solution so that when you're communicating outward from your workstation, that the different panels and the communication devices and the media type devices that are being used can support that. This happens to be a high-level look at an Edwards solution for the incident management operator console and utilizing fire alarm systems to get that voice message out across fire system panels. We have 3 of our panels that are shown up here, but also it could be 2 other third-party control panels. It could be from 2 different other manufacturers out there. And getting that integrated piece, communicating outward across the customer's network and utilizing a voice over IP application to get the appropriate message activated and communicated within a particular building, as well as communicating externally through high-powered speaker arrays and how that interface would work. Looking at fire alarm systems, they're advancing. The other thing to be aware of is that this happens to be the Edwards' latest fire alarm system network and the flexibility of media types. How can you have the different copper, fiber media types connecting systems together? The stored messages is a very big component. You may have a campus that you don't utilize chemical or other types of hazards are in certain areas, but you have them in another area of your campus. Being able to have a level of stored messages within inside a panel is key, understanding that from your solution that you're having to deploy. This product here actually has the capability of having 100 different messages stored on any given one panel that you see on the screen. So, and actually pushing and making those communications, through either fiber, copper, whatever that media type is, that flexibility as well. So the next area of discussion is trying to get that message out, right? So this happens to be an interesting piece. So it's not only that technology of interfacing from your workstations to your fire systems, but it's also that technology on that voice, that intelligibility, that speech that can be heard. First, you need to make sure that, especially in large spaces, that sound modeling is being achieved. That pictorial look there in the center of the bottom of the screen is actually representative of sound modeling application. This happened to be a project that we were involved with that initially was going to take 700 15-watt high-powered speakers to achieve the required intelligibility of the open area space. Went in, talked to the customer, looked at other speakers that would provide a higher level of intelligibility at a different wattage level and communication type, and we're able to achieve this with same space with 22 speakers, saving the client over $1 million on installation cost. So again, it's not just looking at the technology from the head-end piece and the interfacing piece of systems, but also what's the technology for getting that intelligible voice out there, taking that. Looking at the operator console, it's important to have an operator console that is scalable, that's flexible. Maybe it's a single operator, but you want to be able to all of a sudden change, and you want to scale it up to where you have 2 different operator consoles and giving command and control from one versus the other. Touch screen, mouse, keyboard are obvious, but also utilizing pictures, and text. The solutions should be able to give instructions, simple instructions arranged for the operator to advise the operator on what the operator needs to do for when a particular event occurs, as well as tracking or storing the history of what actions the operator took, so that for when you get into that recovery stage and moving back into that mitigation stage, you can analyze, audit, autopsy exactly what the operator did. These are all key components when you're looking at that event workstation for your incident management solution. And it also needs to obviously have emailing and texting capability, or the ability to interface with other solutions that provide that direct recipient piece, and different login levels for operator versus management. This would be a sample screen of a possible, what you might see on a operator station. Oh, where are we going? Oh, there it is. So in this pulled up, this could be actually an IP video camera, a live feed coming in from your, this happens to be a data center, a very critical space. What's happening in there? Who needs to be advised? What's the actions the operator needs to take in that event message down there? This is just a sample area. Given, another piece to consider is actually looking at the screen as far as what should an operator do when an incident occurs across a campus. Maybe there's an active shooter in, say building 1, and that automatically activated the system. But what needs to occur in building 13 or building 12 on the display there? You may want to send out an alert message into those buildings. Having that operator console that has pictorial, easy method to actually get those messages and advising the other people across the campus of what's occurring is important. You have a shelter in place in the one location. The other location may not be shelter in place. You may be wanting those people to evacuate and get them out so that they're out of the way, harm's way of whatever is occurring with it. Or you make it even a simpler piece, right? It's an on-off, looking at it from that aspect. It's just an on-off switch, making it simple for the operator to activate, especially if it's all of a sudden something that something that occurred that's not part of your emergency response solution, but you see that there's actually a message that shelter and alert because of whatever it may be, becomes that go-to. You turn it on, you turn it off. It allows that to happen. It's visual graphic, that allows simplistic messaging for the operator. So to kind of finish up and circle back here, so let's go back to circling to our 4 pillars. And really, again, focusing on the mitigation and the preparedness piece. So I can't stress enough around mitigation, right? It's the beginning, and it's also the restart. It's where that risk analysis begins. It's where the emergency response plan starts to come together. And then we have that preparedness. The preparedness is that training, the drills. Like I mentioned before, we're accustomed to fire alarm system drills. We were accustomed to it when we went through school. But we drill the people in our facility to make sure that they know what's happening? Because we'll have visitors at our facilities daily when we get back into being able to move around. And those visitors are not going to know what to do. Having messages that are clear and concise that our staff and employees understand and associates understand a facility is also going to resonate to a visitor. So the visitor is going to understand what needs to occur. And then obviously, then we have the response and the recovery. But when it all comes together, taking your time, making it simple, it's going to be a solution that continues to be a living and breathing document, as well as the overall system and solution that comes together. So from there, I will move on, and actually I'll go ahead and turn things back over to you, Amy, to see if anyone has any questions that we need to respond to.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. We have been receiving some questions. Just a reminder again, if you scroll over the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A component, and you can type in your question for Tim. Tim, the first question we have is, what type of consultant should be considered for supporting risk analysis?
That's a good question. It's evolving. We're seeing fire protection engineering firms get into being part of that space for offering those services, as well as security consultants, system integrators, the partners that we have that resell our products and solutions are also, entities that can be relied upon for those consultative type services and help, start building that strategy that may deploy a particular incident management software, hardware solution in that. We can definitely help, and definitely looking at it from the Edwards perspective, wherever your location is, and we have our field salespeople that we can engage with as well. So there's quite a few different entities out there that are actually starting to get into this space, mainly due to the fact that obviously it's becoming more of a code and standard driven type space, and it's finally gotten to that point with NFPA.
Great. And then how often should people be reviewing their emergency response plans and taking a look at what they have in place?
Well, I think that was, I stressed that there in the end, that one, it's definitely after every drill that would be occurred, most definitely after every incident. But another time would be maybe the incident didn't occur in your local area. Maybe it was an incident across the U.S. that had occurred. And seeing whatever you can investigate or learn, over the web or through relationships or contacts of what they did out there, and taking the time to see what happened there, and then analyzing what occurred, if it's a similar facility or a different type of facility, and looking at your emergency response plan because there was, a situation where, there was a casualty, unfortunately, or there was, damage to your facility or something like that. So, I guess the answer would be is whenever there's an event, is there's always take that time to kind of see if you're covering that event type in your response plan, or if it needs to be covered in your emergency response plan.
Great. Tim, is there an area in the incident management system that you feel that people sometimes don't spend enough time on or don't have enough invested in?
I think the primary area is that, that foundation of your fire alarm and life safety system. It's really industry-wide. When people talk about incident management or mass notification, they immediately move and say yes to, they have a solution, and they think the solution is their, the emailing, the text messaging, and they're short-sighting themselves and not taking the time to make it more encompassing of other forms of communication that needs to occur within a building or exterior of a building and things of that nature. So I think it's really that, taking the time to look at the overall communication piece and bringing that together that sometimes businesses don't take the time to understand and look as far as that goes. And the drilling, I think drilling is a key piece too. I think that's something that companies implement things, and then they don't take the time to actually do drills to make sure that they keep their employees and associates up to date on what's actually could occur.
For those drills, do you suggest that those are known ahead of time, or are those more, to test that the system's working? Do you have any
Yes and
recommendations?
no. I would say that the initial first drills, definitely making it available, but you're always going to learn more when people aren't aware. So conducting drills when they're not aware and seeing how they function and move is going to be a much better learning experience, and being able to see if your emergency response plan is actually implementing what it needs to be implementing.
Great. Tim, we've gotten a few questions about interoperability and specifically BACnet. Can you talk a little bit about fire life safety programs as part of BACnet, or if they're currently communicating on BACnet?
Yeah, there are solutions out there that do provide some form of BACnet communication. Our newest product that we've brought to market, we would be looking to interface in a form of that. BACnet communication is a form of communicating on that open architecture. Again, the critical piece there is not the interoperability at the platform as much as the cybersecurity piece that's along with it as well. But yeah, BACnet is not as widely used in the fire and life safety side of our industry today. It's much more on the HVAC side of things, but we typically, a lot of manufacturers do have a form of being able to support BACnet into their solutions, or pushing out through a BACnet type communication. So there is that available out there.
Great. Can you talk, we had a question about how do you handle or comply with ADA requirements, especially for mass notification within a facility or a campus?
Well, ADA is really more focused on the visual component, right? So that's where the ADA requirement comes into play. So that's where, your fire alarm system itself, when it's deployed, there's an ADA requirement, which is part of the codes, that says you have to have a visual or a strobe within the field of view. So there's when the fire alarm system goes off. So if you feel that your system needs to have a visual component, like the image that we had earlier, where we had our product actually provides the ability to have two different colored lights, one for clear for fire, which is the standard color in the US, and NFPA for a fire visual notification, and then having an attachment to it for the amber colored device. So really the ADA component really falls under the visual side of things. It's not a hearing piece for the most part. It's really the visual component of where ADA comes into play.
Great. And Tim, can you talk a little bit about, if someone's thinking about implementing a new incident management system, kind of what's the timeline of that kind of implementation, or where's the best place to start?
Well, the best place to start is obviously, getting a hold of, either a company that provides that could provide a risk analysis, or explain to you what a risk analysis may be. That would probably be the one starting point. Implementation. So if your facility actually has a voice evac fire alarm system today and has the capability of storing multiple messages, you're already at your ground foundation position with that. You could have messages stored in your fire alarm system and have just buttons on the front of the panel for weather alert or active shooter alert, or whatever you may need. So it could be as simple as initiating that from a voice evacuation system from a starting point. How long it could take to implement, that's going to depend upon what you have as far as that comes out of that risk analysis and development of that emergency response plan, and what is the overall objective of your incident management solution. So it could take months to more than up to a year probably to officially implement something that's going to meet the overall objectives that you're trying to meet.
Great. And someone had a question about where does skilled nursing facilities fall under NFPA LS 101 as it relates to risk assessment for mass communications?
So that falls into healthcare. Presently, the NFPA and IBC don't have a requirement in skilled nursing, and even in healthcare and hospitals. They're more looked at as a type of what we would call, not public communication, but private communication, to where the individuals that manage the facility are responsible for getting people relocated. So having a message within a hospital or a senior living facility or a skilled nursing facility that advises people of an emergency needs to really be looked at hard in that emergency response plan, because you have individuals that mobility is going to be an issue. And maybe it's not, you may be moving them is not the right thing to do, or maybe it is the right thing to do. How long is it going to take them to move? So, but presently NFPA does not have a requirement for mass notification within the, skilled nursing area.
Great. And I'm just trying to keep up with all the questions that are coming in. Again, if you have any questions for Timm, feel free to send them in. Any recommendations for NFPA 72 standards training? They've utilized FEMA and IMS training in their organization in the past.
The 72 doesn't actually have training per se. It just calls it out as part of the risk analysis that's required in Chapter 24. But there's no training outline in NFPA 72. You would definitely want to look at the other NFPA 1600 or 1616 and 1620 for what they might look at for training purposes. I know I glanced at the FEMA document, and it does have some training there, but it's really working with the companies or vendors that are helping support your emergency response plan and incident management to understand and make sure how they can support a training in that aspect, and in your environmental health and safety people on how they would look at it.
Great. We have another question about, is it acceptable by code to directly interface a fire alarm system with a BMS system?
It is. It is acceptable. It's a BMS system is your building management solution or your energy management solution for your HVAC. It is acceptable by code. That is back to that BACnet question. That is one format of interfacing with a building automation system. So it is acceptable by code. A lot of times you'll see that for larger facilities that have some type of either smoke control or smoke evac, stairwell pressurization, and interfacing with a building automation system.
Great. And we have a question. It's a little general, so you might not be able to respond right away, but it's just related to COVID-19 and some of the different work environments and new types of threats that are becoming everyday occurrences. Is that going to change how we use incident management systems in the future?
Wow, that's a big question.
I know, right?
That's a wait and see. I don't, obviously the COVID piece is not, a direct threat, because obviously with COVID, it's something human to human transmission. And, that's a great question. I think we'd have to, it really would fall more into if there was some type of toxic chemical that was released into an air. Those types of things.
Yeah, more of the bioterrorism kind of component.
Bioterrorism, those types of things, which, that would be a hazard. So, but I would say the COVID piece, not really. I don't know. I wouldn't see that being a change, but you never know. What's who knows what's going to result from this whole activity we're going through.
I know. Wonderful. I'm just looking, I think, unless any other questions are coming in right now, I think we've reached the end of our questions for today. Timm, I want to thank you very much for your participation today, and for Edwards for bringing this content to our audience. I think it was a wonderful presentation. So thank you again. Just a reminder, you will get an email tomorrow with a link to the slides from today's presentation, as well as a link to take your CEU assessment to earn your continuing education certification for today's webcast. And with that, I'll thank you very much, Timm, again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, Amy. Bye-bye.